Hi everyone, this is my presentation on the fourth section of reading for native speaker for our class English 235. So just to get started, I'm going to give a brief summary because in this section we see a lot of things happen all at once. Of course, it is the end of the book, so there are a lot of things wrapping up, but they do definitely happen one right after another. So first, Henry becomes the handler of donations for Kwang. He learns while working late at night in Kwang's basement that his donation system is styled after the Korean money clubs that we have read about. Um, he tends to work late at night after everyone has gone home and then actually go home during the day. Um, he meets with Jack again, and Jack tells Henry that he should submit detailed information about Kwang's donors as a parting gift because Dennis has accepted Henry's resignation with the investigation firm. Kwang continues to grow worse after the fire in his building and the death of Eduardo, Helda, and the janitor. Although he does finally make a media appearance, he does so from the burnt office building, which Janice thinks is a terrible mistake because it looks like the building is ruined, so it looks like his campaign is ruined, and she just thinks it looks really bad media-wise. At this press release, he is startled by questions over Eduardo and how he was affording his $1,000 a month rent for his apartment in New York City as a night student and a volunteer for a political campaign. A while later, during one of Henry's late nights working on donor list in Kwang's basement, Kwang comes to him and wants Harry to drive him downtown. Henry does so and is directed to what he comes to find as Sherry's apartment. She comes out and gets in the car, although she has not been kind of with it lately. She's kind of been distancing herself from Kwang. After this, they go to a Korean club where several weird events happen one right after another. The first of which is Kwang has what is essentially an Asian prostitute ordered for Henry at the restaurant, although he does not want one. And Kwang and Sherry get into a fight where he ends up physically abusing her before Henry pulls him off, which makes him super angry. Sherry and Henry both leave Kwang at the club, but find the next day that Kwang crashed his car, driving the girl from the club home. Kwang disappears for about 36 hours after he's released after crashing the car. And the girl from the club is in a coma at the hospital because her neck had like this funky thing happen during the car accident. So she was in a coma. Janice and Henry are effectively the only ones left after the car accident, at least campaign-wise, because people such as Sherry just totally disappeared, didn't want contact because they didn't want the fallout of the campaign when it finally happened, so they started to distance themselves heavily. Henry turns over the list of donors, and it is found out that a large amount of the donors were in the country illegally, also including the girl in Kwang's car. Protesters gather outside Kwang's house while he's missing for 36 hours, and when he does finally show up, he's assaulted by the crowd and has a run-in with Henry, who wants to defend Kwang in his mind, but his job is done, so he continues to work alongside Lelia, helping children learn ESL, or English as a Second Language. He says he likes his job where he wears a mask and works with the students, and he enjoys how his wife works with the children. And that is kind of the end of the book. So for my 3 key passages, my first one is on page 279. You can follow along in the book, but I will also read it for you. So it's again on page 279. So, okay. It's on page, okay. While Henry's working on finances, he discusses the people he's dealing with while working on the finances. And he says, like John Kwang, I am remembering every last piece of them. Whether I wish it or not, I possess them, their spouses and children, their jobs and money and life. And the more I see and remember, the more their story is the same. The story is mine. How I come by plane, come by boat, come climbing over a fence. When I get here, I work. I work for the day I will finally work for myself. I work so hard that one day I end up forgetting the person I am. I forget my wife, my son. Now, too, I have lost my old mother tongue, and I forget the ancestral graves I have left on the hillside of a faraway land, the loneliest stones that each year go unblessed. So in this passage, we can see how Henry loses himself in his work, but also how significant this specific assignment is for Henry, because he works with Koreans a lot because he can speak Korean, and but this one kind of hits closer to home for him because he's dealing specifically with a Korean politician, Korean people like him of the same ethnicity, the same culture, and so he's really giving like an overarching narrative of an immigrant in America, which is what makes this passage so profound, because they come here and they try so hard to be an American that they lose themselves, and then they feel disconnected from kind of both cultures, which is what we can kind of see happening here. For my second passage, it's on page 338. While Henry is in Jack's car after trying to hail a cab out in the street, Henry sees Jack's car pull up and he gets in it and says, "You knew the play, didn't you, Jack?" Jack shakes his head. "Dennis would never tell me that. You know I would prefer not to lie to you." Henry answers, "You knew about Kwang and Eduardo." "I knew we were not responsible for the bombing. That was not us, but I told you that from the start. But the other matter." "Okay," Jack says, not looking at me. "I did, but only after he was killed. I swear I did not know him. Dennis has other stations at his disposal, you know. He can bring in people when he wants. He was very angry the day of the bombing. Very angry. He let it slip. He wanted payback for his investment." This is a really important one because this finally gives readers the official tell of who Eduardo was working for, and otherwise involved with before his death. We know now he had been working for Dennis, just as Henry is, for different matters that ended up in the same place, which was Kwang's campaign building. This is key because this becomes the main question in later chapters of what exactly Eduardo is up to. It's the main thing that the reader thinks about, I would think, because Eduardo comes up so many times. And this finally gives us that answer, and that Henry's boss knew, but just let him work, basically, which is what makes it important. So for my third passage, which is on page 346, while Henry is back in the Kwang house much later, posing as a hopeful buyer of the home on his own free will, so not for work, he's just in the house because he wants to be there. "Once I get inside the Kwang house again, I call the realtor whose name is on the sign outside, and we tour the place. As she keys the door, she asks what I do, and I tell her I am between jobs. She smiles. She still carefully shows me the parlor, the large country kitchen, the formal dining room, all 6 of the bedrooms, 2 of the masters. I look out to the street from the study at the top of the stairs. We go down to the basement, still equipped with office partitions. When we're done, she asks if I'm interested, and I point out that she hasn't yet mentioned who used to live in such a grand place. Foreigners, she says. They went back to their country." So this one doesn't, like, when I first read it, it didn't seem super important, but after I considered the paragraph, I saw that there was more to it, because of course this gives us readers the knowledge that the Kwangs are not in the country, supposedly, that they were probably deported back to Korea or moved back willingly, but were told by the government to leave. At least this is the story that the public now has. It's what Henry has, it's what the realtor has, it's what the officials are telling people. What actually happens, more of a mystery. This also shows how invested Henry was by even going back to the house in the first place, because he had the ulterior motive of figuring out what happened to John, what happened to his family, and it shows how much he cared for him in his own, not necessarily twisted, but kind of a weird way, because no matter how confusing the situation got in the end, Henry still takes a cab by the house every day and looks at it. He contacts the realtor to find out what happened, so in some sense he still feels connected, he still cares. So for my analysis of a passage, I chose the first one, which was on page 279, when Henry's working with the financials of donors. There's heavy repetition in this paragraph, with the repetitions of the words in this order: come, work, and forget. Further, there's imagery enforced from the very beginning by Harry saying he's remembering his story. He describes the actions of these people and describes the desolate landscape of the gravestones of his family that he left behind in his country. The saved gravestones no one visits because he has forgotten them and it's only him. The repetition in this passage reinforces the image of Henry as someone who has forgot his homeland even though he is an American by birth. He sees himself in these people whose financials he is handling because he has lost himself and trying so hard to be an American since he was a little boy, which is again speaking to that overarching narrative of a immigrant coming to America trying so hard to fit in that they lose themselves. He's been angry about people from his country that couldn't speak English when they came since he was little because he wanted so hard to just be an American and fit in with other English speakers. But in that process, he finally learns that he has lost his native tongue, his native country. He doesn't really belong to either one. And for my discussion questions, I'm just going to include those down in the info on the video because I think that's been working super well. So you can find those there. I'll also include them on the Canvas post, and thanks for watching.